Beef stew preparations. The African case study, Nigeria. Nigerian beef stew is a rich, flavorful dish often served as a mainstay in many Nigerian households. It is characterized by its bold tomato-based sauce and perfectly seasoned beef. This dish pairs well with various staples such as rice, plantains, yam, and even bread. Below is a detailed guide on the ingredients, preparation, serving suggestions, and preservation of Nigerian beef stew. Ingredients. 1. Beef. 1 to 2 pounds of stewing beef cut into chunks. 2. Fresh tomatoes, 6 to 8 medium-sized, or use canned crushed tomatoes as an alternative. 3. Red bell peppers, 2 large 4. Scotch bonnet peppers, Ada Rodo, 1 to 2, adjust for heat preference. 5. Onions, 1 large onion, divided, half for blending, half for frying. 6. Garlic, 3 to 4 cloves, optional but adds depth. 7. Ginger, a small knob, grated, optional. 8. Tomato, paste, 2 to 3 tablespoons for richer flavor and color. 9. Vegetable oil, 1/2 to 1 cup for frying and stew base. 10. Stock cubes, Maggi or Knorr, 2 cubes to taste. 11. Curry powder, 1 teaspoon 12. Thyme, 1 teaspoon dried 13. Salt, to taste 14. Water or beef stock, as needed. Preparation. 1. Season and boil the beef. Season the beef chunks with salt, stock cubes, thyme, and a bit of curry powder. Add water just enough to cover the beef and boil until tender, about 30 to 40 minutes. Keep the beef stock for later use. 2. Prepare the tomato pepper mixture. Blend the fresh tomatoes, red bell peppers, Scotch bonnet, and half of the onion into a smooth paste. You can include garlic and ginger if desired for added flavor. 3. Fry the beef. Once the beef is tender, drain it from the stock and fry in a little oil until browned. This adds texture and depth to the flavor. 4. Fry the tomato pepper mixture. In the same pot, heat the vegetable oil, then add the remaining chopped onion and sauté until translucent. Add the tomato paste and fry for a few minutes to reduce the sourness. Pour in the blended tomato pepper mixture and fry on medium heat, stirring occasionally. This frying process is essential to cook out the raw taste of the tomatoes. It can take 20 to 30 minutes. 5. Combine and simmer. Once the sauce is well fried, add the browned beef and the reserved beef stock. Stir and adjust seasoning with additional salt, stock cubes, curry powder, and thyme to taste. Simmer for another 10 to 15 minutes on low heat until the flavors meld together and the stew thickens to your desired consistency. Serving suggestions. With rice, Nigerian beef stew is most commonly served over steamed white rice. With swallows, serve it alongside Nigerian staples like pounded yam, fufu, or eba. With plantains, fried or boiled plantains are also a delicious side dish. With bread, the stew can be eaten with fresh bread as a dipping sauce for a quick meal. Refrigeration. Nigerian beef stew can be stored in the fridge in an airtight container for up to 5 days. Reheat in a saucepan over low heat, adding a bit of water or stock if needed. Freezing. To store for longer, allow the stew to cool completely before transferring it to freezer-safe containers or Ziploc bags. It can be frozen for up to 3 months. Thaw in the fridge overnight before reheating. Reheating. Reheat on the stove over low to medium heat, stirring occasionally. Add a splash of water or stock to maintain the consistency if the stew has thickened too much during storage. Tips for success. Patience with frying. Ensure you fry the tomato pepper mixture thoroughly to avoid a sour taste. Adjust spice. Control the heat by adjusting the number of Scotch bonnets to your spice tolerance. Oil reduction. If you prefer a healthier option, reduce the amount of oil used during frying, but note that some oil is necessary for flavor. Nigerian beef stew is a versatile, hearty dish that can easily be adapted based on personal preferences for heat and spice. The secret lies in frying the tomato base until it's deeply flavorful, making this stew a crowd pleaser that holds well for meal prepping or batch cooking. Introduction to beef stew. Beef stew is a classic comfort food with deep, rich flavors and a hearty texture that has made it a staple in homes and kitchens across many cultures for centuries. Essentially, it is a slow-cooked dish made by simmering chunks of beef along with vegetables in a flavorful broth or sauce. The result is a warm, satisfying meal perfect for cold days, but it can be enjoyed year-round due to its versatility and ability to be adapted in different ways. The exact origins of beef stew are difficult to pinpoint, as various cultures have developed their own versions of stewed beef dishes over time. Stews in general are one of the oldest cooking methods, dating back to prehistoric times when humans began using fire and pots to slowly cook food. Various ingredients could be simmered over a fire for extended periods, turning tough meats and hard vegetables tender. European influence. The French are often credited with popularizing beef stew as we know it today. Bœuf bourguignon, a famous French beef stew, comes from the Burgundy region and uses wine as a base for the stew, resulting in a rich and flavorful dish. Irish stew is another notable variety, which traditionally uses lamb or mutton, but has become synonymous with beef in many modern recipes. Potatoes are central to this version, along with root vegetables such as carrots and onions. Beef stews also appear in various other forms worldwide. For example, Hungary has goulash, which is a spiced beef stew using paprika, and there's the Mexican birria, which uses chili peppers and spices for a bold, savory flavor. While beef stew recipes can vary depending on culture, taste preferences, and available ingredients, the following components are generally consistent. The star of the dish is typically a tougher cut of beef that benefits from slow cooking. Common cuts include chuck roast. Known for its balance of flavor and fat, chuck roast is ideal for stewing as the collagen breaks down into gelatin, creating a thick, luxurious sauce. Brisket can add a richer texture and flavor, but requires longer cooking. Short ribs are used for an even richer stew, and bone-in cuts like short ribs add extra depth of flavor. Root vegetables are commonly used in beef stew because they hold up well to the long cooking time, without falling apart. Carrots add sweetness and color. Potatoes provide a hearty starch that helps thicken the stew. Onions and garlic are aromatic vegetables that add foundational flavor to the broth, while celery adds a savory, slightly bitter note. The liquid base is essential for cooking the meat and vegetables and infusing them with flavor. Beef stock or broth is the most common liquid, providing a rich, beefy flavor. Red wine is frequently used in French-style beef stews, like Bœuf bourguignon, adding acidity and depth. Tomato paste or sauce adds umami and slight acidity, balancing the rich flavors of the beef. Herbs such as bay leaves, thyme, rosemary, and parsley are commonly used to flavor beef stews, with salt and pepper added throughout the cooking process to develop layers of seasoning. Some variations use paprika, cumin, or other spices, depending on regional influences. The key to a successful beef stew is slow cooking, which allows the tough cuts of meat to become tender and the flavors to meld together. The basic cooking process involves searing the beef cubes on all sides in a hot pan. This browning process creates a rich, caramelized flavor that enhances the stew's depth. After searing the beef, you deglaze the pan with wine, broth, or another liquid, scraping up the brown bits stuck to the bottom. These fond bits add extra flavor to the stew. The beef is then simmered in a broth with vegetables and seasonings for a few hours until the meat is fork tender. This can be done in a Dutch oven on the stovetop, in a slow cooker, or even in an instant pot if time is an issue. Some recipes call for the use of flour, cornstarch, or even mashed potatoes to thicken the stew. The long simmering process will naturally reduce and thicken the liquid, but additional thickeners can create a more substantial, hearty consistency. There are countless regional and cultural variations of beef stew. Bœuf bourguignon is a French dish that includes beef simmered in red wine, often with mushrooms, pearl onions, and lardons, small bits of bacon. Irish beef stew is a simple but hearty stew made with beef, potatoes, carrots, onions, and sometimes cabbage or leeks. Guinness or another dark stout is often added to the broth for extra flavor. Goulash is a Hungarian stew made with beef and paprika, typically served over egg noodles or with dumplings. Birria is a Mexican-style beef stew that's heavily spiced with chili peppers, creating a savory, spicy dish often served with tortillas or rice. Origin of beef stew. The origin of beef stew is intertwined with the development of cooking itself. Stewing, the technique of slow cooking ingredients in liquid, is an ancient method that likely predates civilization. It evolved as humans learned to use fire for cooking and discovered that tougher cuts of meat, such as beef, could be tenderized by slowly simmering them over low heat. Beef stew, as we know it today, is the result of centuries of culinary evolution, and its origins span multiple cultures and time periods. Prehistoric humans realized that cooking tough cuts of meat, along with roots and herbs, in water over a fire made the food easier to chew, more digestible, and flavorful. Archaeological findings suggest that some of the earliest humans cooked their food by placing it in containers like animal hides or rudimentary clay pots over fire. Evidence of rudimentary stewing dates back to ancient peoples such as those in Japan, where the Jomon people used pottery to boil food as far back as 14,000 BCE, and Amazonian tribes, who boiled food in gourds. These early methods laid the foundation for future stew recipes, though they wouldn't have specifically included beef, as cattle were not yet domesticated. As societies evolved and agriculture became widespread, cattle were domesticated for their meat, milk, and labor. The development of pottery allowed people to more easily cook food using the stewing method. By the time large empires like Mesopotamia, Egypt, Greece, and Rome emerged, stewing meats, including beef, had become a common cooking practice. In ancient Mesopotamia, written records reveal recipes for stews that often included ingredients like lamb, onions, garlic, leeks, and other vegetables simmered together in broth. Although beef was not always the primary meat in these regions, this was an early example of stewing as a cooking method. In the Roman Empire, skilled cooks created various stews. The Roman cookbook Apicius, 4th century CE, contains several stew recipes, though beef was not the most common meat at the time. However, Roman stewing techniques helped shape future European cuisine by incorporating vegetables, herbs, and wine into slow-cooked dishes. The Middle Ages marked a significant point in the history of beef stews, particularly in Europe. Beef became more widely available during this period due to the domestication of cattle for meat production. In feudal Europe, people across the continent, from peasants to nobility, consumed various forms of stew. For peasants, stews were a way to make the most of the tougher, less desirable cuts of meat, and whatever vegetables were available. The long cooking process would tenderize the meat and blend the flavors of the ingredients, making it both nourishing and flavorful. A common dish was pottage, a thick stew made from whatever ingredients were at hand, including beef, root vegetables, grains, and herbs. This dish was typically cooked over an open fire and simmered for long periods. While pork and mutton were more commonly eaten in some regions, beef stews grew in popularity, particularly in areas where cattle were raised. Cattle were valuable for both their labor and meat, making beef stews a symbol of sustenance and warmth, especially in colder climates. During the Renaissance, the practice of cooking and preparing food became more refined. Beef stew recipes began to develop regional distinctions based on the availability of ingredients, climate, and cultural influences. In France, beef stew took on a refined role in the culinary world. The French created sophisticated versions of beef stew using local wines and herbs. This is the period when Boeuf Bourguignon emerged, a beef stew slow-cooked in red wine with onions, carrots, and mushrooms. This dish became a cornerstone of French provincial cooking. In Ireland, beef stew, although lamb was originally more common, became a staple food for the rural population, especially during colder months. Root vegetables like potatoes, introduced in the 16th century, carrots, and onions became integral to Irish stews, providing a nutritious, filling meal. As people began to emigrate from Europe to the Americas and beyond, they brought with them their traditional recipes, including beef stew. The 19th and 20th centuries saw beef stew become a beloved dish across various cultures, with regional variations taking root. In the United States, beef stew became a popular comfort food, especially in colder regions. It was often prepared using beef, potatoes, carrots, and onions, with a broth made from beef stock or water. Beef stew became a staple in the diets of pioneers, farmers, and working-class families. In Hungary, goulash developed as a national dish. While it originated as a shepherd's soup, it evolved into a spiced beef stew, seasoned with paprika. Goulash became popular throughout Central and Eastern Europe during the 19th century,